Hello and welcome to American Friction, the manliest US politics podcast in the entire world. I'm Jacob Jarvis.
And I'm Nikki Ramirez.
So the so-called Manosphere was credited with boosting Trump in both of his election wins, particularly in 2024. However, some of these right-leaning bro commentators and figureheads at the helm of this unofficial network are now starting to have reservations about whether Trump is all that great. Better late than never. To discuss the state of the Manosphere, how it ties into politics, and how its members are feeling now, we're joined by Sam Eagan, a journalist who has worked for The New Yorker, Vice, and Wired, to name but a few outlets. Sam, welcome to American Friction.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
First off, Sam, I'd like to ask you, just so we're all on the same page here, how would you define the Manosphere?
Yeah, it's funny because I've written kind of extensively that I think it's kind of a poor term.
Okay.
The Manosphere can range for everything from Theo Vaughn, who is like at best kind of like if I'm being honest, a politically incoherent doofus.
Yeah.
With a comedy podcast, to Andrew Tate,
Yeah.
who is a alleged sex trafficker.
Yeah.
But in general, it's become this sort of loose, generally unaffiliated network of influencers who tend to fall into one of sort of three categories. The term that they often use is look, status, money. You have the fitness side of it, which I think of people like Bradley Martin, who's a very popular Twitch streamer, weightlifter, runs a gym in Los Angeles. You have the kind of like the financial part of it. I think of people like, I don't know if you've heard of Andy Elliott or Alex Hormozy.
No. What's their deal?
Andy Elliott is this guy who, he did this video that went viral and everybody's making fun of him like maybe a year ago, where he was like, I won't hire anybody who like doesn't have abs. You have to have abs to work for my like Airbnb arbitrage company. Yeah. Actually, I don't know if it's Airbnb arbitrage, but he does some sort of, they all do like arbitrage or drop shipping or like some basically, and they sell courses to do this like sort of get rich quick scheme. And then there's like just kind of like the sort of status element. Andrew Tate's there, the Rolexes and the thousands of dollars of cash on the table while he like smokes a cigar and does curls. And then also on top of that, kind of a fourth element is like one thing that this kind of a lot of this runs through is misogyny. I think of like I don't know if you're familiar with the Whatever podcast, but it's this very popular show where basically they just have OnlyFans influencers come on the show so they can belittle them and argue with them about sex and money and culture stuff.
It's I don't think I've ever seen a full episode. I've only ever seen like TikTok clips of it.
Well, yeah, that's honestly the point. And they're these people are very, very good at optimizing everything for social media.
Yeah.
Andrew Tate, one of the reasons that he blew up so effectively was basically part of like selling his courses was that you would have to, so if you wanted to buy into his course, part of the course would be you have to set up accounts, because at this point he's banned from a lot of things, on TikTok, on Instagram, on socials, and post Andrew Tate clips. And basically what that was doing is people who are buying into it are like inundating the feed. So these are very, very social forward people. They understand how the internet works. And it kind of runs through these sort of three main pillars of looks, status, and money.
With the money, are they getting the money from social media? Are they getting it from taking advantage of people who want to be like them? Or is the money all bullshit? Because that's the thing I find quite strange, because I see some of these guys and I think, if you're genuinely so successful, why would you be caring about all this random stuff?
It's a good question. I mean, I think like I said, there's such a wide gambit of people that kind of operate in this universe. You run from like just absolute grifter like Andy Elliott to Alex Hormozy, who is somewhere in between, to like Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and Andrew Schultz, who are like, though they may be disagreeable in a number of ways, like they've no doubt have made most of their money legitimately. As far as the misogyny aspect of it and why they're leaning on the sort of this like looks and status and money stuff, I think something that people not ignore, but I think something people miss about the Manosphere is that ultimately what most of these men are seeking is self-improvement. The people who, when I say these men, most of the people who are consuming this content are seeking is a desire to be better, a desire for agency in their lives, a desire to be in better shape, a desire to maybe live a little bit better, make more money. And what it happens is these people co-opt this sort of valid desire and direct it in a direction that is deeply misogynistic, deeply rooted in outrage, because like I think we saw with the 2024 election, outrage sells.
Yeah.
And also, like, I think personally, mentally, deeply harmful in some substantive ways. It's like you have accounts that like post nothing but like super ripped guys, and it's like looks goals and stuff like that. The accounts that are paid to like sort of promote these on the feed. And that's like, young men and boys are looking at those and being like, oh, I don't look like that. I want to look like that. How do I look like that? You end up on Bradley Martin's page. You end up on Andrew Tate's page. And for a long time, these are kind of the only places that were, I think, talking about this.
Has it changed, particularly the Manosphere, since you started covering it? What's been the sort of evolution of it? Has it developed in the way it is, or is it just, as you say, just spread out? Because it feels to me like it's not really like a bubble as we used to speak about it. It feels like it's a massive chunk of the internet if you're a young man in the world.
Yeah, I think it was I think it's been there since the mid 2010s, I would say. But it really exploded, I think, in the aftermath, like so many things. I think it's becoming clear how much COVID destroyed society.
Yeah.
The COVID-19 pandemic, I think, was a catalyst for a lot of this to really take off. I think as far as the, especially with the fitness stuff, I mean, gym closures in Britain, I understand they're particularly bad. In America, for a whole year, even in parts of the country, particularly in Los Angeles, where Bradley Martin, who's one of the biggest fitness influencers in the world, his gym is located. You couldn't go to the gym. So it prompted this sort of deep sort of backlash to sort of vaguely left-wing democratic values. Even though Trump was president, he was simultaneously rallying against COVID restrictions. And then on top of that, I think you have a lot of the surge also comes from just as there's been like a growth in like acceptance of like LGBTQIA identities. I think you've seen a lot of people this is what experts have told me at least, kind of retreat into a super hyper masculine ideal. So it's like, oh, I don't know what's a man anymore, what a woman is anymore. So I'm just going to be the most intensely hyper masculine version of myself. And I view that as a reactionary, subversive political act to do that. And again, leaning on the outrage selling thing, as these kind of things all came to a head, I think that's part of what caused this sort of rapid growth among a very number of other factors. I mean, there's legitimate concerns here. Like, by all measures, men, and especially young men in society, in Western society, are doing pretty poorly. You have like 3 times in America, they're 3 times more likely to die deaths of despair from alcohol or drugs, 4 times more likely to kill themselves. They're significantly less likely to go to college. Men's wages are drastically down in the 18 to 25 demographic, while women's wages are drastically up. That's not a bad thing, but they're going down and meeting. So there are legitimate concerns here that I think that these sort of actors have played on, and it's kind of all coming to a head. And COVID was kind of like the spark that I think flipped it off.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is a reaction to this feeling of men, women as well. I think generally, if you're a working person in the United States, most developed countries at this point, particularly post-COVID, you're constantly struggling with the feeling that you cannot control your own life. The job market sucks. Everything is expensive. The things that used to be sort of like a given destiny for our parents and grandparents of like homeownership, children, a family, all that are not guaranteed. And I think that sort of inward turn toward what you can control in your immediate environment, your body, your fitness routine, your finances through these sorts of schemes are kind of concrete steps that men in particular feel they can take to re-exert that sense of control that socially they're primed to have. And you've written a lot about this, but I think one of the sort of glues throughout the manosphere, it seems to be just a really common thread, even across these 4 kind of different buckets you described, are combat sports.
Yep.
And you were a D1 wrestler, you know the culture. Talk us through some of the politics of that world and why combat sports in particular have become such a like universal thread in this male cultural space.
I mean, yeah, on the surface level, it's most basal expression. I think that it's easy to look at combat sports, one person fighting another person, trying to dominate each other through the lens of hyper-conservative politics. It's kind of easy to view it that way. On top of that, like if you want to just take like a sort of very Reagan-esque era, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, it's like you watch the UFC heavyweight champion, he's by his own accord, his own merit, like literally fought his way to the top. It's easy to take kind of an individualistic, hyper-conservative, libertarian worldview from that. That's not necessarily true at all. You can apply any politics to anything, but it's easy for that to happen, I think. The most important sort of operative here who has largely caused this shift is Dana White, the UFC CEO, who he's been in charge of the UFC since the early 2000s. And when he and the Fertitta brothers, who bought the UFC, essentially at the time it had been basically legislated out of existence in most states. There were barely any rules. It was hyper violent. John McCain called it human cockfighting, famously. They bought it and kind of turned it around, and they did that in large part with the help from Donald Trump. The very first UFC event that Dana White and the Fertitta brothers hosted was at Trump Taj Mahal in 2001. And kind of ever since then, they've enjoyed a close relationship, Donald Trump and Dana White. But it kind of comes to the surface again in 2016 when Dana White is one of the first sort of major figures to endorse Trump. It was a very short time after he did the famous escalator walk. And Trump has rewarded that kind of ever since. He gave a speech at the 2016 RNC. He obviously gave another one at the 2024 National Convention. In between, Dana White has hosted Trump at a number of events where he kind of just walks him out, and American Badass by Kid Rock plays over the loudspeakers. And it's a very strange sort of, I've been to two of them, and both times it's so surreal.
Dana White was also one of the first people Trump handed the podium to when he won again in 2024.
Exactly.
On election night. Yeah.
Yeah. It is really hard to overstate how important Dana White was to the election of Donald Trump, in my view. He was the sort of nexus, the broker that essentially got Trump on the Nelk Boys podcast during the COVID pandemic. He got him on Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, Andrew Schultz. He is the person who brokered all of these deals, and he tells this story about being on Air Force One with Trump and just telling him that what are you doing TV for anymore? Nobody watches this. Nobody age of 40 watches this, and you need to be doing podcasts. This is what's going to happen. This is what the future is, and he was completely correct. And I think for that reason, the UFC enjoys essentially a complete stranglehold on the market of mixed martial arts. For every dollar, 90 cents is spent with the UFC if you're going to spend money on combat sports in the world. So they've also been litigated against for antitrust practices, and they've settled that suit since then. But and there's another antitrust suit coming down the pipeline. So they run the world of MMA, and Dana White enjoys a complete sort of vice grip on the sport. It doesn't operate like other sports. He sort of runs the UFC. There's no board. There's no independent commission. Everything runs through Dana White, and Dana White is one of Donald Trump's only actual friends, in my opinion. So it was kind of, when I've interviewed Dana White, he doesn't really seem to he's pretty adamant, although it's hard to tell if this is true or not, but he's very adamant. He's like, I don't really want anything from this guy anymore. I don't care about ever being involved in politics again. I just like Donald Trump. So all that to say, I think it's easy to view for the sport to have become so conservative when the person who kind of runs the entirety of it is that close in the Trump orbit.
You recently wrote about efforts to boost quote unquote leftist gym bros.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little more about what they have to say about the dominant aesthetics in the manosphere and why they're interested in having sort of a counter narrative about what's going on in combat sports.
It's interesting when I was talking to a lot of these guys, and I would be careful to say they're the sort of orbit of left-wing fitness influencers is still very small, especially compared to the apparatus that has been built by the broader manosphere. When I talk to them, it's almost like they feel like they're part of it's funny to use this term, but Nixon era silent majority. They're most people who go to the gym and lift weights and work out and cheeseburgers and fucking guns and shit like that. They're not necessarily MAGA, and they feel like they're kind of voicing a common but sort of unspoken viewpoint that is kind of just now, I think, starting to be sort of funded and treated with the seriousness that I think it deserves from the Democratic apparatus. Now you have Democratic operatives brokering deals with these influencers to basically fund their content in a similar manner that the Daily Wire was funded. The Democrats are finally kind of taking this seriously, which is heartening to see. I think for the better part of 8 years, I think messaging specifically to men was like largely abandoned by the Democratic Party. Like even their own the Speaking with American Men project, which the Democratic Party commissioned, they're spending like $20 million trying to research why young men flipped by 30 points towards Trump. And most of it is just, you didn't really speak to us directly. You didn't speak to us on issues that we cared about. You didn't speak to us on platforms that we consume. And I guess that's finally changing.
We can't talk about the Manosphere, combat sports, everything without discussing the politics and aesthetics of masculinity that have been embraced by the Trump administration, particularly in this second term. You have people like RFK Jr. and Pete Hegseth, who are, RFK Jr. is a bit of a weird one, doesn't ever take off his jeans, but the like videos of him and Hegseth doing push-ups, the sort of like Volkish American Nazi imagery that is being put out constantly by, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, Kennedy, who has the last name Kennedy, sort of constantly calling back to these politics of nostalgia of, his uncle and his father. I'm curious how this all trickles down to Trump and then to just everyday men, especially when the counter image we have is an image of Trump who has this sort of propagandic haze around him, but is also kind of decaying in real time.
Yeah. I think one thing that Trump is very good at is putting himself, if he doesn't have an aesthetic mastered, he puts himself around people that do. I think about one of his first public appearances after he won the election, just a handful of days later, he went to a UFC event at Madison Square Garden. And John Jones, who is by most accounts the greatest MMA fighter to kind of ever live, was fighting for the heavyweight title. He won the fight, jumped out of the ring and was shaking hands with Trump and doing the Trump YMCA dance, John Jones was. And I'm in the arena. I'm right next to it. The arena is it's basically like a Trump rally. It's full of Trump flags, full of young men, and it's like Trump. What is happening here is Trump is standing next to one of the most dangerous people on the planet, basically one of the most badass people on the planet, could beat up almost anyone on earth, and that guy is standing there, almost bowing to Trump, being like, "You are the man, you are the coolest, we love you." And so he's sort of leeching from that image where he can't attain it himself. So and by putting himself around people like RFK Jr. and Pete Hegseth, he's able to sort of leech this hyper masculine imagery without having it himself. I would say him getting shot, almost getting assassinated and doing the fist thing, that kind of contributes to his it's imagery too. It's hard to understate that, but he's very good at putting himself around the right people when he cannot convey the right aesthetic image. One thing I think about this a lot, to kind of put it back on to ask you, Nikki, I'm curious why. I get through the lens of RFK and Pete Hegseth, but why inherently is being ripped fascistic imagery?
It's not necessarily just the being ripped.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a lady with eyes. A ripped man is a ripped man, and a ripped man can look quite great in any way, shape, and style. But I think the specific imagery that is being put out by the Trump administration also intersects with the whiteness, the sort of AI generated, especially now that the Department of Homeland Security and they've figured out that they can just use generative AI to create vaguely looking World War II posters of a blonde man with blue eyes standing in a cornfield being you must protect the homeland. That's a very specific image that reads in the same way that I look at Nazi propaganda and I'm oh, you're going after a very specific aesthetic about what you think the elite American man looks like. The story I like to tell is one of the things that got me my job at Rolling Stone was the coverage I did when I was at Media Matters of Tucker Carlson's End of Men special, which relied so heavily. Batshit crazy. Insane stuff. But one of the things that really stuck with me, and this is why I think about RFK Jr., who himself is not a prime physical specimen, but through his identity as a Kennedy, embodies a lot of the policies that surround American fitness, things like the presidential fitness test, all that stuff. Those are kind of Kennedy era policies. This idea that there was a time in American life where we did have this image of a very hot, attractive white man as president sort of dictating the health of the nation. And it was a time when the nation was kind of at its healthiest. The Tucker Carlson End of Men special used so much B matter from like Kennedy era productions that it was just hard not to notice.
Yeah.
We've talked about it a lot on the podcast, but Hegseth also, I think it's being driven largely by Hegseth, this sort of idea that, you know, no uggos, no fatties.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And you do see this administration that is targeting Black people. It is targeting immigrants. It is doing racial profiling in these ICE arrests. And at the same time, you have the leader of the military saying you must look and behave in this certain way. You must fit this aesthetic that I have assigned for you. And what I like to say is what Hegseth wants is warriors, and it's warriors that don't have a war to fight. The United States currently is not sort of in like an active troops on the ground military conflict with another nation. So all those aesthetics of the American warrior and the American warfighter and the protector of American values aren't being turned outward. They're being turned inward.
The enemy within,
Toward the enemy within, the undesirables within the population. And at the same time, you have the administration putting out like a very specific image of what they consider to be desirable within the population. So that's my response.
No, that makes complete sense. I think just my feeling on that is like ultimately what being ripped is being used for there is it's just a vector. It's just a way to deliver this. And I think about Soviet propaganda. Mm-hmm. Like go after this podcast, for everyone's listening, go take a minute afterwards and go Google Soviet Olympic advertising. Even just like general sort of propaganda posters, CCP propaganda posters. Like they lean super heavily on very ripped, very attractive men. There's nothing inherently physique about it. It's just what it projects is, I think people want to feel agency, especially as everything is kind of stripped slowly away from us as we're in like kind of end game capital, and you lack agency anywhere else in your life, as you say, right? Like people want to feel agency, and kind of like when I think about this, I think about to throw it to Britain, I think about the famous prisoner Charles Bronson, who wrote that whole book on like prison workouts, and he's like, you can't take working out in solitary confinement, and it's like you can put me in a 10x5 cell, but you can't take my mind. People want to feel agency, and this has been studied. It's people who are ripped are inherently perceived to be conservative, and for people who have left-leaning politics, muscularity is perceived to be a net negative aesthetically. So which is it's just something that I think that the left kind of desperately needs to shed. I mean, I don't think this is necessarily true, but like the aesthetic, and certainly a lot of people believe this. They'll like, you start posting about the kind of classic trope of like, you start posting about like, oh, like you need to be fit, fascists are coming from you on Twitter, and then the replies are like, that's ableist. Like I need to be able to get my DoorDash. Like how ableist of you to say that like everybody should be exercising.
Well, our good friend Jack Crosby, who profiled Hassan Piker, and they put that very sort of, I think it was not the greatest headline that they put on his article, but what was it? It was the leftist in like a MAGA body.
Yeah, something about the MAGA body. Yeah,
it's a great article. The headline did Jack dirty, but it was a great read about exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I think politically all it projects is agency and capability. Like the same reason that I think, among other reasons, one of maybe prime of the most important of which is just that he's weird. One of the things RFK Jr. is projecting by wearing jeans when he like deadlifts and does push-ups is like an eternal state of readiness. He's like, I don't care what's going on. Like I'll be in between meetings, and if you need me to bang out 50 push-ups, I'll bang out 50 push-ups. And that's not like, obviously to be good at politics and to like understand policy, you don't need to do 50 push-ups. But especially in the social media age, everything is aesthetics. And people believe that. People think that it's important. And I think you're seeing that the left is starting to agree that people think that it's important, and they're putting a great deal of money behind it all of a sudden,
I hear you on the agency side of things. I think that's like a really interesting point that people feel that way, but it's something that I kind of want to get into how maybe people within the manosphere or people who follow the manosphere are feeling politically at the moment. But it's a risk that the manosphere has created for itself, that the longer it goes on for, the sooner that people realize it's bullshit agency though, right? Because like some of these guys that come up to me and I see like, they'll come up on my Instagram feed, and it's like, it's astonishing how frequently I'll sort of follow a guy because he's got some interesting workouts or he does some running stuff I like, and then suddenly he posts some like weird right-wing shit, and I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, like how has that happened again?
Constantly.
But like also I follow these guys and I think, well, I can't do that unless I quit my job. Like I could be as shredded as that dude if I never had to work again in my entire life. And the same with like, there's this, I do wonder with the manosphere if maybe might the bubble break the longer it goes on for? Because I hear you that it is a sort of, it can start off as a quite naively, potentially, but harmlessly aspirational thing to follow. Like, I want to be a bit fitter and I want to be richer and I want to be what I deem to be a traditional man in America and care for a family and whatever else. And that's not all totally bad. But the issue being that, like, most of these people that you end up seeing and people follow, you can't be like that. Not everyone can have a huge podcast. Not everyone can have less than 10% body fat. And not everyone can be a millionaire guy from running drop shipping schemes.
Totally.
So is that going to make that all burst eventually?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to come off like I don't think that this is a grift. To be clear, like that it is a grift ultimately. And I think that I think there is a potential for it breaking, particularly because this is no longer really that subversive. The most powerful political office in the world loves this shit. You know what I mean? A lot of what this is leaning on is the Manosphere is leaning on is their ideal of masculinity kind of being perceived, whether it's true or false, being perceived as being in the minority, being a super masculine man in a femboy world, being like a subversive act, and it's increasingly it's not that way.
How do people who are following it at the moment kind of feel politically? Because I keep seeing sort of rumblings around the idea that the Manosphere might turn on Trump. The question that poses to me is, well, where do they turn? Trump is the only sort of natural political home for them at the moment. And I know maybe sort of Theo Von is someone who has been saying, hey, maybe this guy isn't so great. But I don't know if he ever thought he was that great. I just think that guy's pretty fucking dumb, to be honest, for the most part. He's got a bigger podcast than me, so maybe I'm just bitter. But I don't know, like, where are they seeming to turn? And is the case there kind of, well, there isn't anywhere for them to turn if they did want to turn away from the options are kind of engage with Trump or disengage politically. There's not really much of a third way for them at the moment.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that a lot of this kind of world has with the Democratic Party is like less their politics and more this. We live in an era of like where to be famous is to be accessible, and like you think of it like the old Hollywood movie star where you saw them like 2 movies like a year tops, and like they never did interviews, and you like heard from them barely ever. Like that's completely flipped on its head. People want access to people all the time. These influencers lean on this, and that's the same politically. And Trump, I think, is a natural fit for that world. He's like a New York City tabloid guy. He loves like any press is good press. And the Democratic establishment is this weird sort of amalgamation Cronenberg monster of very expensive advisors who are like, don't say this, don't say that, don't go on this show, be very careful, don't offend anybody here, don't do this, don't do that. We got to make sure we're perfectly right on what we say here, or we're fucked, and these guys hate that level of what they perceive as like being unauthentic. It's this sense that like we can't get these people in a room to talk to us like normal people. In the SAM project, the Democratic Party's research on this, like the number one note is that like what they like about Republicans is that they're unafraid to offend. And so what I think that until the Democratic Party, I think, embraces the level of like access and relative fearlessness to offend and to be able to like go to ability to go on shows and be like and say something kind of maybe outlandish and hyperbolic and just move on when they fuck it up a little bit, and to give that level of access that Trump did to these kind of podcasters and influencers, not even just to like the Manosphere types, but like, I mean, what Kamala did, Call Her Daddy, and like the NBA show, and that was it. There's a million other shows these people could be going on. It's not just about these shows, but it's about not being so afraid of saying the wrong thing all the time. And like, we live in an age where no one gives a fuck about anything anymore. There is no more outrage. We're all outrage fatigued. Unless the party can accept that, like, to go on these shows, maybe get something wrong, fuddle the words a little bit, and just move on. I don't see, unless they can do that, I don't really see them having a political home on the left, these sort of Manosphere types. It's hard for me to see that happening. Obviously, you have like Aiden Ross kind of backing off of he's like, Nikki, you wrote about this. It was a good piece.
Yeah.
Aiden Ross being like, I wish I never got involved in politics. Joe Rogan is like very offended by Trump's methods of, the Trump administration's methods of deporting migrants. And then Theo Von obviously got really offended. Did the DHS use a clip of him for one of their like hype videos? But it's hard for me to see them going anywhere. To your point, I don't really know what their political home, where their political home is on the left. Certainly not with, most of the major candidates. I think, like Mamdani is kind of an exception here. He's like a lot of the demographics that flipped towards Trump are like going towards him in New York in a pretty surprising way.
Yeah.
And I think he's pretty good about that. He'll go anywhere and talk to anybody. And he's very like, there's anybody can kind of join this movement. There's a political home for you here if you're just willing to jump on board.
Did these guys just sort of sleepwalk into politics as heavily as they did, do you think, kind of? Because it seems to me like they wanted to be involved. The whole thing is kind of low-key political. It's like small p political, but probably had been away from actual party politics, the political machinery in the United States. And then, look, if you want to get a load of people to listen to your podcast, having Donald Trump on it isn't such a bad thing. So that must have been part of their mindset. I don't want to treat all of these fully grown men. I mean, Theo Von, he's like 45 or some shit. Like he's not like a baby.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that when I heard that. He looks good.
No, I thought the same. I was like, yeah, I'm glad someone agrees with me. I said he looked good, and someone was like, what are you talking about?
No,
like,
he does not look that old. Yeah.
Dude looks good. But like, do you think I don't want to remove the agency from them because I think they've enabled something not good. But at the same time, did they have just kind of low expectations of maybe their own clout and what it would do politically? And were they just initially going, hey, well, these famous dudes do want to come on our stuff and we'd have any famous people on it if they're famous and interesting. So whatever. And that's kind of now they're actually having to reckon with the moment of people going, oh yeah, you guys aren't kids and you're kind of responsible for this, and they don't really get that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be careful when I talk about this to separate the like sort of comedy shows from like the Andrew Tates of the world,
Yeah, sure.
But like I think a lot of this is like normal people's view of politics, which is just that like, oh, like it's everything in this world is like rooted on like being buddies. These people want to be buddies. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, my buddy Dana, who like I hang out with when I'm in my buddy Dana White, when I'm, in Vegas, we play blackjack together. And like, he really wants to have the president on. And like, it's respectful to have, it's like, he's the president. Like he's been the president before. Should I have him on? Like, these people aren't thinking politically in the way that like you and I necessarily are. Obviously they're adults. And like, if they stop for a second to think about the like ramifications of like what they're doing, like they may have, thought a little bit differently or acted a little bit differently. But that's everything kind of runs through this like vector of like buddydom,
Yeah.
Everybody wants to just come on and chum it up and like have a fun little conversation. And they really do, to your point, want politics to kind of take a back seat. Not really how it works. Trump is one of the most divisive figures in the world.
I think for me, one of the things that really stuck out to me is in that article I wrote, in sort of hearing people like Andrew Schultz, Theo Von sort of say like, this isn't what I voted for. I don't like this. I don't like what's happening. Is that for all the fixation on these aesthetics of like a very physical masculinity, a masculinity that is combative, that is proactive. Most dudes in the manosphere don't really have a stomach for the actual physical manifestation of cruelty, of like cruelty and humiliation against other people. And that, to me, and I'm curious what you think about it, Sam, has been a very interesting switch to watch, because you do have so much of the rhetoric that comes out of the Trump administration, out of these people who are, in a way, defining a lot of this movement centered around exacting punishment against the groups they don't like. And then you see sort of the influencers that are tasked with conveying and trickling down that message to the everyday man. And when push comes to shove, they can't really stomach it. And that's really stuck out to me over the last sort of like 2 months.
It's a good point. It's something that I've been, I think, thinking about a lot. It feels like they really just latched on to like the fearlessness of offending, and that was, especially most of these guys are comedy people. They have
Fearless
this
podcast.
Yeah, they have this like obsession with like being able to say whatever they want when they want. And I think in a lot of ways, Donald Trump embodies that. But it kind of became the like be all end all. And I think, to these people that maybe that is the extent of their like perception of masculinity. It's not like Andrew Schultz is John Jones. He's not training to fight anybody. It's like, that's not maybe the most important part of his masculinity. I very much do think that it is like they got pulled in by the access and the perceived relatability, and then kind of very stupidly so, to be clear, and in a very ridiculous way, surprised by the cruelty, if that makes sense, in a way that is shocking to me. I don't know how you could have been blind to that, but nonetheless, it seems that they were. Yeah.
Just a final question for you, Sam, to wrap things up. We've spoken a little bit about how the Democrats could maybe engage differently with this demographic and whatever else. And I constantly hear stuff like, oh, they're pumping money to these random influencers, or like, why isn't there a Joe Rogan of the left? Which I think because the Joe Rogan of the left can't exist to my mind, really. It's like an oxymoronic thing to say. To reach the demographic that the Manosphere does and to counter this, is the point just being that they actually need to stop trying so actively to do that? They need to not do it in such a conceited way. Is that maybe, part of it is just drop the guards and actually just provide some interesting stuff? The economy seems to be the biggest issue that feeds through all of this, and just, maybe be themselves a little bit instead of trying to confect a persona which might draw these people in.
I think that's right. And I think one of the things that I thought was actually quite smart from my reporting on the way that they've been paying these like gym influencers is it's not like, I want to be sparing as I can on the details, but they're not being paid to like go out and be like, oh, like we're endorsing blah, blah, blah for senator, they're being paid to make content that loosely espouses left-wing values. So it's they can go out and do content on like, we're going to do squats today, and like, then maybe I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of like, hating gay people is bad. That's stupid. Like, don't do that shit at the end, I think the Democrats' idea of like political content, there's no subliminality to it. It is all so deeply overt. And this really isn't an idea of what a like left-wing masculine lifestyle would look like away from the most overt form of politics, to your point. And I think they're trying to create that now. We'll see if it works. I think, a lot of these Manosphere guys, especially the comedy influencers, their politics are like deeply incoherent. Like, they hate foreign wars. They hate people who are inaccessible. They mostly don't like Israel. But outside of that, it's a crapshoot of nonsensical politics.
Yeah.
I think you're really trying to pull people in here off of vibes. And it's smart of the Democrats to, I think, be pivoting to more of like generic lifestyle influencing with like a pinch of quote unquote leftist values, as they put it.
Yeah. Sam, thanks so much for joining us on American Friction.
Thank you guys for having me. This was fun.
Thank you, Sam.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on American Friction.
Yeah, thank me too. Oh my gosh, yeah. Love you, Jarv.
Love you too, man. And thank you to all of you listeners for joining us for American Friction. Remember, if you want to support us and help us keep having conversations such as this, you can back us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/American Friction. And if you are a Democratic operative out there and you want to give us some money, you can do that too. Follow us on Patreon and we can talk. I'm Jacob Jarvis. This is American Friction. Come back again soon.